of the things the Republicans failed to do, and the Democrats, of course, completely underestimate the intelligence of a voter. And if you underestimate it, the voters will live down to your expectation. And so whatever lie you want to tell is fine. You're appealing to the voters. But the Republicans don't really counter it very well. For example, this idea of clean energy. At one point, Biden talks about disaster by 2025, and later on, of course, he said 2035, which is, I think, what he really meant the first time. But that's nonsense. And he's going to create jobs, and you're going to have all this wonderful stuff going on if the government puts the investments where it belongs and stuff of this sort. That's already been tried in the Obama administration. Look it up. I'm going to give you the list next week. I should have brought it with me. But the Obama administration subsidized by grants and guaranteed investments a whole bunch of so-called clean energy companies, solar panel manufacturers. Solyndra wasn't the only one. Cuomo in New York spent $750 million on a failed project for solar panels and clean energy stuff. The ones that were subsidized by the Obama administration, and go look them up. Green energy companies subsidized in the Obama administration, and see what happened to them. I did a survey. I had a student a couple of years ago do a survey of them, and they had, most of them, I think one exception, had like 30 of them. And with one exception, they all shared the same criteria. They failed. Two, they were heavy into government grants and investment by Democratic contributors, and the federal government guaranteed the investments, which is on some of them, that's not done. Investments are supposed to be high risk stuff. You invest in a startup, you lose, you win, but here the government actually guaranteed some investments. Aside from giving grants. So what were they? They failed, had government guarantees, and their investors were Democrats, and who didn't lose money or didn't lose much money. So we've already had it. We've already had the command economy. Why don't the Republicans tell us what the Democrats are advocating is a command economy? And that goes right back to the progressive movement, which I'll talk about in a minute. A command economy. Who commands it? The centralized authorities. In the Franklin Roosevelt administration, which National Recovery Act essentially provided for big government, big unions, and big companies to get together and decide what was fair competition and what wasn't fair competition, and had disastrous economic results. You read Amity Shell's book on the Depression and how Franklin Roosevelt, kept us in a depression for 6 extra years. Great book, read it. So why don't the Republicans say what the Democrats are advocating is a command economy? And that is, of course, what the progressive movement has always demanded. And I'll get back to that in a second. But before I do, I want to go back to some other things said. Biden is selling himself as this great and wonderful person, character-wise. Now, so I have, and of course Trump is being this terrible human being, and I have this interesting why Jewish voters should support Biden. This is when the Atlanta Jewish Times of, I think, October 15th, and there's why Jewish voters should support Trump, and the headline of that is Deeds versus Words, Why Jews Should Support Trump, and that was written by Chuck Burke, who's the head of the Republican Jewish Coalition in Georgia. And it talks about all the things that Trump actually did, the policies he follows. Now, you go over to why Jewish voters should support Biden, and what you have is an article that is primarily an ad hominem attack on Trump. And it goes beyond dispute that Trump is a bad guy. That's essentially, doesn't say much of anything about what evidence he has of that, but just that everyone knows he's a bad guy. So we have why Jewish voters should support Trump, because Trump's a bad guy. Why they should support Biden, because Trump's a bad guy. Why should they support Biden because he's a good guy. And this is I like this because I was in Delaware when Joe Biden was a senator from Delaware. Here is what the author of this particular, and I won't mention his name because I don't want him to get any nasty mail, but you can look it up, get the Atlanta Jewish Times. Biden is a decent, compassionate man who shares our values. He meant Jewish values, whatever he meant by that he didn't say, except being nice, while Donald Trump plainly does not. He's a decent, compassionate man. Really. Biden is a mensch, which means wise person, and we barely need a mensch in the White House. Oh, really? So, nothing much about policies here, except in broadest terms. Be nice to poor folks, be nice to mommies, and be nice to kiddies. Let me tell you now what a Biden supporter said about Biden. Someone's more knowledgeable than the person, obviously, who wrote this article with the Atlanta Jewish Times. This is in Harper's magazine, which is pretty well committed to the liberal establishment, progressive establishment. Although I have some very good articles that, when they get away from the politics, they get some great articles. One about Ireland and a couple others I read. They had a good article about Wisconsin, Kenosha, Wisconsin. It was written by a obviously liberal reporter, but it was observational. So it didn't get into ad hominem attacks on Trump or Trump supporters. Anyway, this one is in Harper's Magazine of November 2020, called Easy Chair by Kevin Baker. And the subtitle is, You Say You Want a Revolution. And now this is a Biden supporter. This is someone who knows and follows Biden's career, and he's supporting him. I acknowledge I'm just quoting directly, I acknowledge the shortcomings of the Democratic candidate. His years spent carrying water for Wall Street and credit card companies. His past willingness to contemplate cuts to Social Security and Medicare in the interest of balancing the budget. His opposition to busing as a means of integrating schools. I'm aware that Joe Biden hails from a Democratic establishment that has consistently refused to push for bold social and economic changes, even when its candidates ran and won on such policies. So why does he support Biden when he has a much more realistic view of the real Joe Biden? He doesn't even mention the fact that Joe Biden's historically a liar. In fact, Biden lies so much, he even did it recently when he claimed in the town hall with Stephanopoulos that the Boilers Makers Union endorsed him in Pennsylvania. They endorsed Trump, not him. He said he spoke to them, and after he spoke to them, they endorsed him. No, Joe, that's another lie. They endorsed Trump. But then you go, Joe's used to lying. I'm at the top of my class in law school. No, Joe, you're at the bottom of your class in law school. And how about him borrowing the life story of Neil Kinnock, who's a labor leader in England? He borrowed not only his speech, he borrowed his life story. Plagiarized the whole thing, 1988. How about saying he was arrested in South Africa? No, you weren't. How about him saying that he marched with the civil rights people in the 60s, except that no one saw him at any of these marches? One after another in terms of making things up. And I don't know what he made up on this speech. I'm sure he made up the story about he and his dad seeing two men kissing in the 60s. No way that was true. But if you know Biden, you know, of course, it wasn't true. So why does Kevin Baker still support Biden when he probably also knows what a liar Biden is? And of course, the recent stuff coming out about the corruption of the Biden family. I mean, come on. They have a computer. This computer was seized in December of 2019. Not this year. And there's all sorts of stuff on that computer. And the FBI has opened an investigation, a money laundering investigation. But of course, having this evidence, emails, the computer, that's not verified. It does. Oh, but someone charging, some addle-brained psychologist charging Kavanaugh with doing something 40 years ago when he was a teenager with no evidence, not even the people that she said could verify her story. All of them says, we don't know anything about it. Can't put Kavanaugh and her together at the same place. She didn't know what party she was at. Totally, completely unverified story, and the press ran with it for days and days and days and even longer. They're still running with it. They're still using Senator Susan Collins' vote to confirm Kavanaugh against her in Maine because she was fair-minded and said there is no evidence here that you could even charge anything to Kavanaugh. But anyway, so why does Mr. Baker support Biden? And here's what he says. But there's a profound difference between leaders who can be pushed, who may even want to be pushed, and those who will push back in any way they can. Pushing Joe Biden and the Democratic establishment would be hard work. Trying to push Donald Trump and his personality cult, alleged of course, for another 4 years would be a waking nightmare. So, why support Biden? Because he can be pushed. Another word for that is manipulated. And that's why he likes Biden. Essentially the best we can hope for at this time. And by the way, if you didn't catch it, Trump did point out that Biden is the favorite of Wall Street. So was Hillary Clinton over Trump. And Biden is the favorite of Wall Street. He's the one who's being funded by the Wall Street money, by and large. And when Biden said, not true, Biden was another lie. This is public record, folks. This is not speculation. Public record. You give over $200 to a campaign and or candidate, and you're on the public record. And look, we did I think I mentioned this before on the show, and I'm sure I did. We made a list of the ultra rich in this country. Go ahead and make a list. Use the Forbes magazine list, 20, 25 ultra list. Who are they in favor? These are people with multi-billions of dollars. Virtually all of them are Democrats. All of them have a vested interest in opening up China and are opposed to Trump for limiting their access to China based on American interests. They have no particular interest in America when it gets in the way of profits. See the National Basketball Association, for example. So why don't the Republicans say it? I can make a list. Jeff Bezos, Gates, make the whole list. Dorsey, make the list. They're all Democrats. And the first time I made the list, there was of the top 10, there was one Republican. Now, I think when you go down to the top 20, you may get 2 or 3 more Republicans. But overwhelmingly, the Democrats. That's why Biden is outraising Trump, massively outraising Trump. The Democrats are collecting so much more money. The Democrats are putting $75 million against Lindsey Graham in South Carolina. That's the report. $75 million to defeat Lindsey Graham. They think they can defeat him. Well, they have reason to believe that. Some study I read some years ago, maybe 20 years ago, about competitive races, or when races become competitive, who wins? The candidate with the most money. We're up to a break. See you after the break.
Hey folks, this is Victor Armendariz with the On Point with Victor show. Just to remind you, don't miss every Tuesday 2 to 3 live right here on America's Web Radio. And remember, I'm not angry, I'm just right.
McAllister's Auto Transport is a privately held company celebrating our 75th anniversary this November, specializing in enclosed-only transportation to the OEM, personal, snowbird market, and our favorite market of all is the collector market. Give us a call at 800-748-3160, or you can reach us on the web at mccollisters.com, and that's MCCOLLISTERS.com. Large enough to handle all of your transportation needs, small enough to provide you the old town, old school service that you come to expect when you're moving your baby.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
This is Robert D'Agostino, Professor Robert D'Agostino, back with Do Facts Matter. By the way, just before I go on to some other issues that were raised by Trump and Biden and by the entire movement that's taken over the Democratic Party, I want to do one more thing, and this is a talking point. This comes right out of the article in the Jewish Times and by the way, the person who wrote that article is a board member of the Jewish Democratic Council of America, and he's head of the chapter in Georgia. So he's got some clout, and he's got certainly contacts, and yet his ignorance is amazing. And I'll read this because this is something that is just. John Kerry said about the same thing. The accomplishments Trump touts on Israel are long on symbolism, short on substance, and have not made Israel safer or more secure. Of course, the Israeli government may disagree to that. The Israeli government was lobbied for the United States to get out of the Iranian nuclear deal, which was a phony deal from the beginning. We gave them $1.5 billion in cash to bribe them to sign the thing, and they cheated from day one. The Israeli government had absolute evidence of the Iranian cheated, and they were cheating on the nuclear non-proliferation treaty all along from 2003 on. But yet, the Obama administration was so desperate to have a, quote, foreign policy success, unquote, that they were willing to take a foreign policy defeat as long as it looked like a success. And they say that Israel's security depends on peace with the Palestinians. That is nonsense. Depends on peace with the other Arab states with which Trump is delivering. Nobody cares about the Palestinians. The other Arab countries care about what's good for their countries. If using the Palestinians to stir up trouble suits their purposes politically, domestically, or foreign policy, they'll do it. If it doesn't suit their purposes, they'll desert the Palestinians, which is what they've done. Look, except for Jordan, the Arab states have not welcomed the Palestinians into their countries. They keep them in refugee camps. Countries act the way people do, and in their own self-interest. If it's not in their self-interest to keep the to so-called quote support unquote the Palestinians, they won't, and they're not. So people like John Kerry are fools. They don't understand that. Understand politics, international politics, and of course we have the same nonsense being spouted by this author in the Atlanta Jewish Times, that somehow the Palestinians are key to peace in the Middle East. No, they're not. Key to peace in the Middle East is a strong opposition to Iran, and for the Arab countries to finally not only secretly get in bed with Israel, but really come out and ally with Israel to protect their own sovereignty and their own interests. It is Sunnis against Shiites to a large extent. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about what the Democratic Party has become. And there's no question that the Democratic Party is now a progressive party, not liberal. I always felt liberals were, what liberals were? They're bleeding hearts. They supported all sorts of programs that made them feel good for their support. Didn't make a difference what the so-called beneficiaries, how much they harmed the beneficiaries. Great Society programs, war and poverty, really destroyed the lower income communities, which were primarily black communities, destroyed the families. They didn't care about that because it made them feel good. Just like, oh, we got to take care of the homeless. We can these fancy operations, these fancy buildings, and extra care. We got to do it. We got to do it. Well, yeah, that makes you feel good. Not necessarily helps the homeless. About 1/3 of which belong in mental institutions, and probably another 1/3 are out there because it's fun and criminals, and about 1/3 really need the help. But the distinctions aren't being made. And we can see that in San Francisco. We can see that in Austin, tent city in Austin. Heck, I was reading where Austin, which is, of course, the center of liberalism and progressivism in Texas, has a completely Democrat city council. And now there are 2 of those seats of the city council that are competitive. The Republicans may actually win those seats because people are fed up with the policies of the left-wing Austin government, defunding the police, allowing tent cities, restricting the limits on public camping. So Austin now has become another mecca for the homeless, and that includes. Look, it includes some people who really need some help. But look what happened in New York and in San Francisco when they opened the hotels just to the homeless to give them shelter and bring them in food. Well, they essentially wrecked the interior of these hotels. And in Portland, they had to get them out of the hotel. They had made such a mess. Drug dealing, rapes, crime. So when you have about 1/3 of the homeless population are criminals, and many of those are on the streets because they want to be there, they intimidate, they make victims of the other 2/3. The mentally ill, because some of the mentally ill are criminals also, obviously a lot of them are, and those who really need the assistance. Maybe we ought to make some distinctions, although distinctions, of course, are forbidden by the left right now. Men and women are not different, obviously not, right? That's to a leftist. But let's take a look where this came from, or where a lot of it came from. The progressive move, and by the way, before I go into that, let me tell you my view of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And I think brilliant lady, no question about it, very influential, no question about it. But what? Her entire career on the Supreme Court was directed, in fact, even before that, was directed at advancing the progressive agenda by subverting the Constitution. You heard me right. Advancing the progressive agenda by subverting the Constitution. And I am, in fact, working on a research paper that's the theme of my research paper. Hopefully I'll finish it over the Christmas vacation. I can't get to it right now because I have a lot of duties at the law school that I have to complete, and a difficult course I'm teaching, which involves a lot of work with the students, which is fine. I mean, I enjoy that, but it does leave me limited time for other things. I got 6 grandkids. Because my wife has injured herself, she has trouble. She can't drive right now, so she'll be able to drive fairly soon, but I have to haul her around occasionally, and that takes, of course, a lot of time. But let's get back to the progressives. The modern progressive movement, of course, is in 1900s, early 1900s, and the Woodrow Wilson, got to be essentially the first really progressive president. I know you say Theodore Roosevelt, but yes, he was a progressive president in the sense that he wanted to bring the monopolies to heel, and environmentalist. The first national park was pushed by Theodore Roosevelt and created by Theodore Roosevelt. But the movement as a whole really focused on what they had to do under Woodrow Wilson. Now, what did Woodrow Wilson? Woodrow Wilson made no bones about the fact that he was contemptuous of the U.S. Constitution. He thought the U.S. Constitution was a barrier to creating a secular utopian society. If only we let the experts run the country. And we had all these Interstate Commerce Commission and form all these administrative agencies because the experts would know how to run the country. We can't leave the decisions in the hands of the people through their representatives. We've got to take the hands into the hands of experts. They will run the country. They'll tell us how to live. And that's what the progressive movement was about. And in a practical matter, the theory was, here's where we want to go. By the way, one place they wanted to go, of course, a lot of the progressives pushed eugenics. In fact, when Hitler first came to power in Germany, a lot of the eugenicists in this country, praised it. What wonderful thing! Hitler was going to do great things for Germany. Later became obvious to even most of the progressives what an evil person Hitler was. But in any case, and how evil some of his policies were. Most of his policies were. But he was still a centralizer, command economy, and that's no different. I mean, socialism is about a command economy, but appointing who? Appointing bureaucrats, politically oriented bureaucrats to run the show. And how does that differ from corporate capitalism, where the government still makes a decision? In corporate capitalism, they let the people who know how to run the companies run them, just as long as they do what the government tells them to do. And that was actually Hitler's what Hitler said when he was asked if he was a socialist. And he said, yes, of course I'm a socialist. Well, why aren't you nationalizing the companies like Lenin? And Hitler's answer was, and you can look this up, I'm paraphrasing, was because I want to leave people in who know how to run the company as long as they do what I tell them. And that's what we have with the Obama administration, these Green New Deals. That's what we have with Biden. We'll let these people run the country, and they know it. The big companies know it. That's why they support the Democrats. The big corporations, the biggest ones, not the ones who actually produce something like oil and gas and silver and steel and that sort of stuff, but the ones who really have the wealth now, the Facebooks, the Twitters, the Googles, all these servicing and consumer-oriented companies, which now dominate the values on the stock market, and most of them have the desire. They consider themselves citizens of the world, and the U.S. would be a good place to have cheap labor. Therefore, open borders is wonderful, and we don't want administration Trump interfering with our access to China and the Chinese market. 1.3 billion people as opposed to a mere 330 million in the United States. The future is with China. Our future profits are with China, and therefore we support the Democrats because they're with us on that. And it's now time for another break. I'll be back in a few seconds or a minute or so. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Dr. Mike Karuchak. Have you ever wondered what doctors talk about amongst themselves? If you do, join us on the Doctor's Lounge and hear the doctors' conversations amongst themselves. Join me and my co-host, Dr. Hal Schertz, every Thursday morning, 8 to 9 a.m.
If your health insurance premium is more than your mortgage, Ellen Deal with Ideal Solutions is here to help. Whether you're a small business owner, individual, family, or baby boomer, email MAGA45CAG@gmail.com and I'll respond with 3 easy questions to help you determine if you can get away from Obamacare. As a 20-year veteran of the insurance industry, I'm here to help with all your insurance needs. Email Ellen Deal at MAGA45CAG@gmail.com.
If you live to serve and want to make an even bigger difference, consider joining the U.S. Army. With training in fields like medical care, linguistics, and engineering, an Army career can amplify your efforts with humanitarian opportunities all over the world. Plus, you'll receive competitive pay and incredible benefits, so you'll be taken care of, too. Learn more at GoArmy.com.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
This is Professor Robert D'Agostino back with Do Facts Matter, and I'm talking about the progressive movement and its really ideological beginnings with Woodrow Wilson. And Woodrow Wilson was very plain. You can look this up, look up his speeches about his contempt for the Constitution because it interfered with creating what would amount to the secular utopia. And of course, what constitutes a utopia is always defined by the intellectual vanguard, as Lenin would have called them. And so the intellectuals would get together, decide what they were really going towards, and whether the intellectuals ended up supporting a communist operation or, for that matter, a Nazi operation. It depends on how they defined what utopia was. Utopia was Germans running everything. Utopia was forced equality. And a lot of what's coming out of the progressive movement right now is the same thing. You say, well, they're against meritocracy. Yes, they're against meritocracy. Because people who have merit, people who are able, are not necessarily tremendously loyal to their bosses because they have options. If you get people who don't, like Stalin was very good about how he seized power from Trotsky in Russia, about getting second, third, and fourth raters into key positions. They knew they didn't belong there, and they knew Stalin put them there, so they had absolute loyalty to Stalin. And so Stalin then had a free hand of eliminating any of those people with real ability that might be in his way or might not be sufficiently loyal to him. But anyway, getting back to the progressive movement here, and the advance of the progressive movement is about the advance of centralizing authority in the federal government. Centralized authority and ruling through experts. And who are the experts? The people the various administrative agencies, Federal Drug Administration, CDC. Look at the CDC. I mean, the CDC interfered with the private sector making personal protective equipment. It interfered with them developing testing for COVID-19 and other viruses because it wanted to keep it to itself. They knew what's best for the rest of the country, and they knew how to do it best, and they didn't. So when Trump says Fauci is, I guess, a fool, I mean, if you look at what Fauci has done, how many times he's changed his mind about things, yeah, the science... follow the science, but what is the science? You know, Richard Feynman said, the great physicist said, science is the knowledge that the experts are wrong. And what he meant is that whatever the scientists say needs to be challenged, and because science is never settled. Science moves. If science was settled, the universe will be in Newtonian physics. It's not. Einsteinian physics, relativity. Your GPS would not work if we applied Newtonian physics to it. It only works because of special relativity, and we apply the principles of special relativity, which I won't discuss on this show, but I'll have a guest sometime, and we can talk about that. So the science is not settled. And if someone says science is settled, they're full of it. And when Biden says, you know, climate change is, well, climate change, you know, it's not clear what's driving climate change. I think that the consensus is there's some warming, not necessarily land warming, but if you take a look at some of the temperatures in the ocean, you see a slight spike in some temperatures in the ocean here and there, which could be significant. But most of the heating up the world comes from where? The sun. So you have to take a look at, are there a lot of sunspots? Apparently they're increasing again. That would increase the amount of radiation coming to the Earth. Do every scientist believe that humans are really driving climate change? I doubt a majority of scientists really think that, because they have to get their grants and do their research. And it very well could be that human activity is contributing to a slight warming. I think a lot of analysis of some of the data indicates that that may not be true, but it may be true. You take precautions, but to believe that the solution is wind power is crazy. And Trump was completely right about wind power. aside from killing the birds, which it does, it kills thousands of birds. They get chopped up by the towers, generating the. Plus, it's intermittent, no wind, no electricity. So you have to have batteries to store the electricity, and batteries got to be produced. And how they produce? They're produced in factories using natural gas and other fossil fuels. Or they have to have supplementary source of energy. And if there's no nuclear available or there's no water power available, then it's fossil fuel plants. And Trump was right about California. And by the way, it was this complete lie that we have more hurricanes now than we've had. We had a lull in hurricanes for like 10 years. But you go back, the national facts and figures indicate that we're not having increasing hurricanes. We may have 1 year of increasing hurricanes, but on the average, they're not increasing. And in fact, they were decreasing for a long time, the frequency of hurricanes. So maybe global warming caused a decrease in hurricanes. One has to look at the data, and this politicization of the data is very bad. And the Democrats, of course, are infamous for politicizing the data. Interesting study came out recently about the deaths in Florida. And the study indicated that about COVID deaths, about 10%, minimum of 10%, and maybe as high as 40% of deaths attributed to COVID-19 were not COVID-19 deaths. Minimum of 10%. Could be at 40% or more were not COVID-19 deaths. So again, yeah, look at the science, but the science changes, the results change as you do more experiments, do more research, and get better at it, and find more information. So anyone who says the science is settled, you can disregard what they're saying because they don't know what they're talking about. The science is make the best guess at the time. It's not settled. Okay, let's go back to the progressives. I know I keep going off on another tangent, but the progressive movement was about certain things. They did embrace the environmentalism of Teddy Roosevelt. They certainly embraced the anti-monopoly, but the anti-monopoly stuff, it's not just bigness. That wasn't necessarily the big issue. The big issue was the bigness that then led them to use their bigness to intimidate and to unfairly treat others who try to enter the market using strong-arm tactics. Look, Google, who's been sued by the government for monopoly practices, they were fined over $2 billion in Europe, not because they were big, but because of their practices which limited access to the market, limited competition in the market and under European law illegally. And I think it was $2.7 billion they were fined. So they've lost 2 cases in Europe on the basis of violation of antitrust laws, using bigness to intimidate and suppress competition in ways that are unlawful. So when Google, says, no, we're not doing it, these are frivolous, this is a political stunt, no, it's not. They've already lost on those issues elsewhere, and they'll probably lose here also. But we'll see. Obviously, if the Republicans get the House and the Senate and keep the presidency, these big monopoly, Facebook, Twitter, Google, they're going to face some limitations on the use of their power. Not bigness itself. It's the use of that to disable competition. That's the problem. So what else were there? Environmental stuff, yes. Monopolies. Eugenics. Eugenics was a big issue for a lot of progressives. We've got to purify the country, or so purify the race. Hitler loved U.S. leaders of the eugenics movement. They gave him cover for what he wanted to do. And they were, they haven't gone away. Eugenics by another name And abortion. Abortion is, instead of killing people or sterilizing adults so they can't have children, or killing people when they're adults like Hitler did, they get rid of them in advance. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the great progressive, the great liberal, in an interview with the New York Times Magazine, what'd she say? She said she supported abortion because one thing it does is get rid of people in populations we don't want more of. What's she talking about? Who gets abortions? Low-income folks, minorities, particularly blacks, higher rate of abortion than other groups, Hispanics. Kind of interesting that she would have said that. Look it up. Go into the computer, put in Ruth Bader Ginsburg, abortion, New York Times interview, and you'll get exactly what she said. And what she said is she liked abortion as population control method, and also because it limited people in populations we don't want more of. Look it up. So the progressives have not moved. The only difference is progressivism is now a complete liberal, a complete religion. Since, of course, the country's not only post-Christian, it's anti-Christian, it's anti-traditional values, and so everyone needs a religion. So we got progressivism as a religion, and we have a priesthood. You know, the the bureaucrats in the government, they decide what isn't acceptable. Magic, they believe in magic. I mean, a lot of primitive religions believe in magic. Yeah, and progressives believe in magic. You know, boys can say they're girls, girls can say they're boys. What else is that but magic, right? And they certainly believe in infanticide, and they call it abortion, or they call it late-term abortion particularly. And in New York, and current governor of Virginia, you know, after they're born, if the abortion fails, you let them die if they're born alive. Our last president, Barack Obama, felt the same way. He said, you know, if they were born alive, he refused to support a law that would have protected babies born alive. So anyway, you've got progressivism now become a religion, which means that facts don't matter, absolutely don't matter. The police are going around genocide against young black males. There's no statistic that shows that's true. Yes, there is a lot of evidence that driving while black could get you stopped. But you know, you say, well, why is that so? Why is that so? Why is it so that so many young black males get stopped as compared to white males? No, they don't get shot. They don't get killed in any greater numbers, particularly than whites. And although there's more whites or unarmed whites are killed every year than unarmed blacks. But why is it so that they get stopped? And after the break, we will discuss that little issue and why the progressive movement doesn't accept the true reason.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls of all ages, I am Roger B., host of the Locked and Loaded Show on America's Web Radio. Join me live every Tuesday at 1500 for the best in gun news, gun products, and gun politics.
Whether cruising the strip in a 57 Chevy or taking the family on a vacation in a 71 Oldsmobile Vista Cruiser, you need to tune in to Classic Cars with Steve Ronaldo and Jim Weber every Saturday from 8 to 9 a.m. on americaswebradio.com.
McAllister's Auto Transport is a privately held company celebrating our 75th anniversary this November, specializing in enclosed-only transportation to the OEM, personal, snowbird market, and our favorite market of all is the collector market. Give us a call at 800-748-3160, or you can reach us on the web at mcallisters.com, and that's McCollisters.com. Large enough to handle all of your transportation needs, small enough to provide you the old town, old school service that you come to expect when you're moving your baby.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
It's Professor Robert D'Agostino, back with Do Facts Matter, and I was talking about the articles of faith since progressivism is a religion, and we know they believe in magic, I just said so, they know they believe in infanticide, like a lot of primitive religions, and then they have articles of faith, and they have to be articles of faith because they're just not true, that there's wholesale police brutality towards particularly black males, just not true. There is, of course, the phenomenon of black males being stopped much more frequently than white males. And what's the reason for that? One has only to look at the crime statistics and the race of the perpetrators of crime as reported by the victims of crime. 6% of the population are black males, and they commit an enormous percentage of the violent crimes, 30% or maybe more, an enormous number of homicides. And the question is, the police are trying to preempt crime. And what happened in, let's say, stop and frisk in New York, done properly, it got a little out of hand on the Bloomberg later on, done properly, caused a lot of thugs to leave their guns at home. I got this appeal from the Brady PAC about gun control, and my response was, well, when the Brady PAC is interested in taking guns away from law-abiding citizens and more regulation, and, okay, maybe some more regulation is justified in that area. But maybe the Brady PAC should be interested in taking guns away from criminals. Notice that gun control people are not interested in taking guns away from criminals. The progressive movement doesn't care that criminals have guns because it's a religion. It's a religion that aims at a revolution, and a revolution needs pre-revolutionary chaos, and criminals having guns increases the chaos. And how many people get killed? How many more people? I mean, the homicide rate in poor neighborhoods is now going through the roof because of defunding the police, because the police are not fair game, and people no longer fear the police because they can just, policeman stops me, I'll sue him for a civil rights violation. So you've got this reluctance to even stop black males that are known drug dealers in these neighborhoods. So what do you have now in the neighborhoods? You have, one of the biggest increase and group that's buying guns, black females, women. They got to protect themselves. The police have been driven out of their neighborhoods. The drug dealers and the petty criminals and the thugs, the gang members, now have taken over. They got to protect themselves, and they're buying guns. They're arming themselves. So when the left tries to say, oh, there's all these vigilante groups are forming, and well, if you defund the police, someone has to keep order, and that's how they feel, and that's dangerous because they're not trained, and the police are. And so now that we have demonized the police, so they don't enforce the law anymore, and they certainly don't enforce preemptive law the way they did in New York. How many thousands of homicides are going to take place that would not have taken place if the police hadn't been demonized, if stop and frisk hadn't been stopped? How many people is the left willing to sacrifice for an ideological point, for a pre-revolutionary chaos? How many people have to die? Well, what one of the leaders of the Socialist Party in England said when Khrushchev gave the speech about the crimes committed by Stalin. He said, we always thought we had to sacrifice a generation. To what? Sacrifice a generation so we can impose utopia? What left-wing government, what progressive, and they're all progressive governments, ever? What happened in French Revolution, the first great secular utopian revolution? The first revolution, utopian revolution, completely divorced from Christian values. What happened? The terror happened, which led to Thermidor, which led to Napoleon to impose order, which led to Napoleonic Wars. What happened in Russia? The violence from 1905 to 1917 led to the takeover by Lenin and the vanguard, the Bolsheviks. And one of the first things the Bolsheviks done was shoot all their allies, the Mensheviks, the cadets. Look it up. One of the things about the left, it always eats its own, and since it's destructive, you can never create utopia. So it's always somebody's fault why we haven't gotten there. So there's always a group to be liquidated, to be put to gulag. The Commentary magazine, I mentioned that I think last week. The headline was, on the cover, commentaries put on the American Jewish Committee, but it's read by a lot of people, very influential. It said, "You will be re-educated." That's what it says. That's what cancel culture is about. Heretics must be re-educated, burned at the stake, sent to gulag, re-educated, canceled. You lose your job, lose your friends, lose your outlet for your writing. That's what cancel culture is about, is to enforce the new religion. The religion is progressivism. Those of you who are religious progressives, you support this stuff. No more First Amendment. That's got to go. The Second Amendment, of course, we all know that has to go. So the Second Amendment protects the First Amendment, so you got to get rid of the Second Amendment, and you got rid of the First Amendment. So what's going to come out this side? I don't think the majority of American people will actually become religious progressives, will not adopt the religion of progressivism. The magic. People look at it and say, what? Boys can say they're girls? Girls can say they're boys? Look at that stupid question. Now I say stupid, look at the stupid answer that Biden gave to this woman who said, I have a transsexual child, 8 years old, and you think that your child is a transsexual? I mean, to say that is what I would call child abuse, to support that. It's virtue signaling. Look at me. I am so liberal. I am so progressive. I understand my 8-year-old wants to be a different sex, and I am supportive of all that. I may even give her hormonal treatments. God forbid. Look, if you take a look at the studies, the real studies, even teenagers who claim they're transsexual, they change their mind. By the time they're in the mid-20s, some of them are totally out of it and it's heterosexual sexual life. A lot of them become homosexual, lesbians or gays. That's fine. They don't want to change their sex. They just have same-sex attraction. Now, whatever you think about that, certainly being transsexual is a mental illness. Now, same-sex attraction is a different story. I have done some research there because evolutionary biology is one of my hobbies, and I've even written in the area. And I've done a lot of research about nature and nurture. And I'm convinced that there's no homosexual gene, but I'm also convinced there's a genetic basis for same-sex attraction. And nurture will either encourage that or discourage it. But there is a genetic basis for it, and interaction with the environment it'll come out or it won't come out. Some people are more prone to be homosexual than others, but there is a certain level of genetic involvement with every trait, whether it's same-sex attraction or whether it's aggression or whether it's intelligence. You know, the genes set parameters, and in the nurture, the environment will have those parameters expressed one way or another. I always give the example of height. You have genetic predisposition to a certain height, but nourishment and the amount of food and nourishment has a big effect on it. The typical North Korean is 4 inches shorter than the typical South Korean. Why is that? Because it's about nourishment, about the availability of food. If you go down to a nation that's suffering a famine, which, of course, thanks to the pandemic and the shutting down of economies where agricultural goods are made, our shutdown experts have caused a limitation of agricultural goods flowing into certain parts of Africa, and now you're getting famine. And there's absolutely a lot of evidence that famine, children not having sufficient protein, sufficient fats, particularly fats actually, will grow up with an IQ suppressed by like 10 points. That's a lot of 10 or 15 points suppression because of nurture, because they didn't have enough fat sheaths on the nerve cells, and that's that. So you go to a country suffering from a famine, and what do you have? You have an average IQ of 80 or 75, and you have one that's not, and you get your average IQs between 90 and 110. So it's very much a combination of nature and nurture. Well, the progressive religion is inconsistent. Homosexuals have a gene, but intelligence is not genetic. It has to do with opportunity. Well, there are people have different intelligence. Look, I can't be an abstract mathematician any more than most of you could be that. It takes an incredibly high IQ to understand mathematics at that kind of level. I have a limit. My limit is between, which I sometimes have reached it and sometimes I haven't, I don't think. Sometimes I wonder what I did with my intelligence. Not enough, but we all think that way. But in any case, progressivism just recognizes what they want, what fits their religious ideology. And if their religious ideology says they believe in magic, boys can say they're girls, girls can say they're boys. They have sacrament of infanticide, which they now call abortion or late-term abortion. It's infanticide, just like primitive religions. If they have articles of faith, the police are murdering blacks willy-nilly all over the country. It's an article of faith. That's all that article of faith. And there's other articles of faith that have another article of faith that if we let experts make our decisions, we'll have a fairer society. And well, experts, who made the decisions in Soviet Union? People put in charge of decision making. This is a command economy. Who made the decisions in Nazi Germany? Centralized government. Who made the decisions in Pol Pot's Cambodia? Look, Cuba, they have how to allow private businesses to form to save the economy since they were cut off by Russia and the Soviet Union. Well, that's the end of the show. I hopefully I wasn't too provocative, but then again I meant to be too provocative. Thank you.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Get your pen and paper ready. If there's a move in your near future, I'm